For anyone that doesn't know, this video is taking me like a week to prepare. And this is even like the audio or the editing part. That part's going to be easy. It was the research. The research took the most amount of time. But there is a very fun premise within this video. And that is to go through the entire roster of GuiltyGearStrive to see who is the most buffed and nerfed through its entire history. I also looked to see who got the most amount of reworks as well, so if you're interested in that, you're going to see a lot of things. And I'll play a game with you guys. I want you guys to guess who is the most buffed or nerfed character in the comments before actually finding out the answers. And you can even guess the character if you want to. You can pick the number character, it's completely up to you. Have a bit of fun. Maybe you'll get shocking results. I mean, you could just cheat and skip to the end and find out your answers, but you know, have a bit of fun with it, stick with the journey. But let me get into the rules before we actually talk about the buffs and the nerfs and that. It's important to know the rules and what were my guidelines when making this video. Step 1 is very simple. I will only count buffs and nerfs. And I won't look at it like, oh, they buffed the one move. I'll look at the buff specifically. So for example, if they buffed the star up in active frames, that's 2 buffs. If Arxis says something to do with the move being a buff, but it turned out to be the opposite as time went on, I'm going to pick the opposite. I'm going to pick nerf instead. Rule number 2. Reworks are very subjective, so they'll be counted as their own thing and will not be included in the buffs and nerfs. Except when it comes to new moves, because new moves have no downsides whatsoever. They are a new move that are made to make the character stronger, so they'll be counted as a buff. I will not count the betas or alphas of GuiltyGearStrive due to the fact that this was a testing period for the game, as in it doesn't represent the final product and what they wanted on the launch of GuiltyGearStrive. So looking at that beta doesn't count. And number 4, I will not count universal changes when it comes to balancing the roster. For example, anything to do with Roman Cancel, Wild Assault, or Counter Blitz will not be counted in this video. Now you know the rules, all the silly stuff is out the way, time to get into the first character, Saul Bad Guy. One thing we have to keep in mind is that the base roster will go through the most amount of changes because they've been here longer. So looking at Saul, he definitely got hit. It was very interesting to see. In total buffs, he has 30 buffs. In terms of nerfs, he has 60. In terms of reworks, he's had 16. The biggest reworks kicked in during, I believe, Season 3 or Season 4, and a lot of his nerfs kicked in during about Season 2 time and Season 3. And most of his buffs came from the later seasons and I think Season 2. It was very interesting to see this. The first main character who's busted on launch had to be nerfed to this degree. Very interesting. Whereas Kai Kisuke is in a bit more of an opposite situation. You go to Kai, he has been buffed 71 times, nerfed 57 times, and reworked for a total of 7 times. 7 is a theme across this board, as you can see. Kai's buffs are very high, but let me tell you something, despite that number being 71, near the triple digits if you add on 30, this is not the most buffed character in the game. Get ready for a bit of fun with this video, I'll tell you that. Overall, pretty balanced from what we've seen here, and he totally needed the buffs in a lot of the seasons, as he stands out as a pretty solid high tier in the current point of Strive. Heading to May, now this is a fun one. She has 50 buffs, 50 nerfs, and 14 reworks, most of the reworks being done on the Dolphin and the feints and all that. The buff and nerf ratio is perfect, a flat 0 across the board. Axel is also a very interesting one. He got 95 buffs. Even during the point where people argued he was trash and garbage during Season 4, he was still getting buffed, by the way. This is insanity. 36 nerfs and 13 reworks, a lot of it being during the Season 4 and Season 3 point. Now I want you guys to keep in mind, the buffs that I'm counting aren't exactly astronomical buffs. So if a buff number leads to this and Axel is only high or a pretty solid tier and not a top tier, it means it's like small buffs like active for 1 more frame or plus 1 more frame. That's about it. That's what was a lot of Axel's frame data when I was reading it. That was a lot of the buffs. That's a huge number, right? You wanna know something? That's still not number 1. That's not number 1. What? That's crazy. That's near triple digits. Heading to Chip Zaneth is also an interesting case. He kind of got the Saul treatment where it's 29 buffs, 57 nerfs, and 15 reworks. This is a very interesting case indeed. 29 buffs across the entirety of almost 5 seasons is kinda low. That is a really, really low number. And then the 57 nerfs kinda hitting a lot of things. It was interesting. The main reason why this nerf number is so high is because his damage numbers on the tightrope had to be adjusted for every normal. It was 5 nerfs to his normals in terms of damage, and then 5 nerfs on rope normals. So that was 10 nerfs in the one patch. Just from the normal damage. There could have been so much more that was nerfed. This is why it was such a high number. Heading to Potemkin, and I think you'll understand why he is a top tier menace without a doubt. Buffs, 87. That's a lot of buffs. But they have also hit him, as he's taken 47 nerfs throughout the entirety of the game's launch, and he has had a high number of 26 reworks, making him the second highest reworked character in the game. And this all came from one patch. He was the most reworked character during the launch of Season 4, changing character cancels on every special and every normal, changed them to this degree. 19 reworks in that one patch. That's high. Heading into Foss, the big bag man. Now, this is a very funny, unbalanced number. I think he got the most unbalanced in terms of buffs and nerfs. And considering where he's at, and considering how Foss mains talk about him, you'll be all like, how? He has had 96 buffs and 19 nerfs. This character is a bit of a struggler in the current patch, but he's been buffed 96 times! And what this comes down to is that when he does an item toss, that's 9 separate things that are going to need buffed or nerfed. It's just that most of the time they got buffed. And a lot of his tools on launch were pretty bad, so he got buffed heavily in the first patch. I think it was 19 buffs in the first patch. And reworked 9 times, this is mostly on the item toss itself, and some of the items getting a decent rework. For example, Floating Trumpet, which was counted as a buff when I was reading some of it. I guess you could say that his buff position kinda doesn't count because it's mostly on his items and not him, but it's up to you and how you count that. Amelia Rage. Now, I would consider this the most complainy fanbase, just with my interactions with some of the players. Most are chill, like Walter for example, and Scarfell, but a lot of them are very complainy. She has been buffed 87 times and nerfed 33 times and reworked for a total of 4 times. The character hasn't received a ton of reworks, but in terms of buffs and nerfs, they are very high numbers. And yet they'll be all like, oh, she's not good, she can't do normal into normal pressure. And it's like, she can do the left, right, high, low, and I can't block it, so I don't know, she must be pretty good. Heading to Zato, and you know what? I think the Zato bros really got us with their propaganda, because this is also a mad one. 96 buffs, 31 nerfs, and 6 reworks. That's a high number. Now, you know what's funny? During that patch where Zato was declared Zatum 1 during, I think, Season 3 or Season 4, he received a total of 12 buffs and 3 nerfs in that one patch. If my numbers are correct. I can't remember what patch. Point being, in the patch where they said he was low tier or bad tier, he got buffed a lot. It was just the one nerf of hitting Eddie Gauge in the way it works that really affected the character, because everything else was basically a buff. Really shows how much Zato players like hold on to the couple of nerfs that they get compared to all of the things on their plate. Like a spoiled child slapping away the broccoli because they want their pigs in blanket. Ramlethal got a couple of awards, but we'll talk about that later. Her numbers are actually quite mad. Buffed 43 times, nerfed 85 times. That's a really high nerf number. She is by far one of the most nerfed characters on this list. That's a very high number. And reworked 29 times. So far, that is the highest amount of reworks that we've had. This is madness. Of course, Ram is a character where they can't decide on her gimmick ever. Like, how do her swords work? How do her normals work? Is she set play? Does she deserve it on hit? Can she pick them up? That's why she got reworked that amount of times. And she's been nerfed a lot of times, because as we know, Ram is currently top 2. She's always been a strong character, and the nerfs don't do enough. And looking at the next king, he's very interesting, I would say. A lot of people would say he's nerfed the most, and it's very interesting to see the numbers, as he's been buffed 56 times and nerfed 62 times with a total of 5 reworks. And what's interesting is the number. 56 buffs is still a pretty high number, and 62 nerfs is a very high number so far. And you're probably wondering where do a lot of these nerfs come from, and that is when they were doing the damage changes during Season 4, where every normal and back turn got hit. So not only was every normal hit, every normal back turn was hit, and that led to like 10 more nerfs on top of the already like 8 nerfs in that patch. So his nerfs are kinda boosted, but it makes sense. Nagoriyuki, despite being a launch member, his numbers are actually pretty low, with a total of 49 buffs, 37 nerfs, and 6 reworks. This is a base roster member, and his numbers are nowhere near the height of Kai Kisuke, Saul Bad Guys, or Leo Whitefangs. His numbers are kinda low. Probably the lowest affected character in all of these patches, if I'm honest. Despite the fact he has been reworked quite a bit, like not being able to special cancel off of normals, but what it comes down to is that you can't special cancel off of free normals. And they got changed. So that was free reworks. Besides that, he's not been reworked a whole lot. It was just 3 main things that we recognize. Geo is also pretty balanced in terms of numbers. 53 buffs, 46 nerfs, and of course 10 reworks. The numbers are pretty decent, nothing insane. She's just overall fine. The numbers are pretty average here. These are fine numbers. The Nago numbers were low and the Ram numbers were high. This is average. Angie Mito. Now, a lot of people would consider us one of the most buffed or reworked characters, but what's interesting is that that is not the case. Angie has been reworked, but you have to remember his toolkit is actually very limited. He doesn't have a lot of specials, so when they rework it, it's like 2 things that they're reworking. Despite having so much depth in those 2 things that they rework, the numbers aren't that high. So he's been buffed 52 times, nerfed 32 times, and reworked for a total of 12 times. These numbers are quite low for what you'd imagine for a character that couldn't Fujin whiff cancel on day 1. Quite mad, I know, but what it comes down to is that a lot of the buffs that he got were like super buffs. Like if I had to count them as a buff, I'd count them as 2 buffs, right? But I can't do that because that's not the rules. And a lot of his reworks were super reworks. It's just that they didn't do it as often, but they were very impactful. That's why it feels like there's more despite having very average numbers. You know, oi. She has been buffed for a total of 60 times, nerfed 51 times, and totally got a rework 5 times. Her numbers are very average, and in terms of reworks, are actually very low. It always feels like she's been reworked the most, but if you look at the reworks, they're mostly just buffs. Like, oh, now she can do her air dash or hover dash quicker, or she can cancel out of it quicker. That's just a buff. That's it. That's not a rework. That doesn't change how it functions. It functions the same, it's just that it's better, you know? Average numbers, pretty fine across the board, very balanced I would say. I think Golos got the highest numbers for being a DLC character, but he's the first DLC character. With a total of 76 buffs, keep in mind that he has 8 special moves that need to be adjusted, so that's why that's that. 42 nerfs and 17 reworks. The reworks be mostly done on his aerial behemoths and his behemoth cancels, allowing for a lot of rework numbers, but not a lot of impact on them. And his buffs are all affected individually to their security level and how all of his specials work with Behemoth. If they need to buff Behemoth Typhoon, they need to buff 8 different versions, you get what I mean? So it's very interesting how that all works out. And on to the next DLC character, Jacko, with a total of 58 buffs, 28 nerfs, and 8 reworks. 8 was the magic number with Jacko, and as you see, it's very interesting. Buffed quite a bit, nerfed not really a ton, a decent amount I would say, and reworked quite a decent bit for a DLC character. Nothing mental here, there's not really anything to know, just a whole lot of number changes. Happy Chaos is so interesting because a lot of people would consider Happy Chaos to be one of the most nerfed characters out of the roster, as they've always tried to change the character, make sure he's not busted. But you want to know something? The nerfs are impactful, but the numbers aren't. Total of 34 buffs, 37 nerfs, and 20 reworks, making him the highest character in terms of reworks for DLC, but this is still insanity. This is such a low number compared to Golos and Jacko. This is a low number, and you feel like this character's been nerfed a ton, because if you look for any patch, it'll say nerfed. But he hasn't. He really hasn't. It's just impactful nerfs every time. It's just they didn't do a ton, even though he needs a ton back in the day. Now he's garbage. And you'll understand how obscure these numbers are when you get onto Biking, as she has 53 buffs, 41 nerfs, and 7 reworks. It's quite mad. The numbers here are average, Happy Chaos was lower. And Biking Reigns will convince you this character's been nerfed a ton. And you know what? True, 41 nerfs are high, but look at the buffs. 53 times this character has been made stronger. Yet she still feels very underwhelming. Quite mad indeed. And these numbers are also quite mad for a current bottom 4 pick right now. You'll be shocked at these numbers that Testament has. They have 79 buffs, 23 nerfs, and a total of 3 reworks. this is a madness. Stain was definitely a rework, but they didn't really rework most of their kit. A lot of the kit that got nerfed was during that final patch, but if you look at every other patch, buffs. And that is why the number is so high. This is quite shocking, isn't it? You wouldn't expect this from Testament. Because with their meta impact, it doesn't feel that high. Like, they never had a situation where I would consider them a top tier or a high tier. They've always been mid or low. 79 buffs though. Same as Foss, quite mad. Then you head into Season 2, and this is very interesting. As the poster child of GuiltyGearStrive, Bridget, you think she'd have either a high amount of buffs or a high amount of reworks, but it's actually quite mad. 37 buffs, 41 nerfs, and a total of 3 reworks. She's not been changed a ton, has she? Like, in terms of buffs, there's nothing mental when I was going through the list, and in terms of nerfs, again, nothing mental. And it was the recent patch that mostly effed her up. That's why I would consider her a struggler in this patch, because of the recent one. And then the reworks are just kind of like whatever when I was reading them. I think the only rework that was quite mad was the Scoop one, but that was about it. And looking at Sin, his numbers are basically the same, except the buffed. Buffed 2 more times at 39, nerfed 41 times, and reworked 3 times. The only thing that they've ever reworked is his eat mostly. They've reworked some other things, like his tools like Elk Hunt for example, but it was mostly his eat that has been affected. And the nerfs I remember reading was on a lot of the normals, surprisingly. A lot of the normals got affected with damage, for example. It's quite mad looking at the numbers. Bedman, now this one is a madness. Bedman, for a character came out in Season 2, that means less patch notes, has been buffed 55 times, nerfed 19 times, and reworked for a total of 3 times. This is a huge number for buffs in Season 2. Because if you look at anyone else, they do not get that high. They do not get that high for certain. So Bedman gets that award of the most buffed character from the Season 2 roster. A lot of the buffs come down to not only buffing the special moves, but also the error follow-ups and how they all work. So that is why the number is so high. And a lot of the nerfs weren't really anything crazy when reading them up. It was a lot of the fairer ones you'd expect. And the reworks, I couldn't really find a whole lot. I mean, there were tools that were reworked, but there was nothing where I'd look at it and go like, oh my god, that's Kara cancels. You know what I mean? Moving on to Asuka, you could want to give him another award because he's so close. In terms of buffs, 9. This character has 9 buffs with 40 nerfs and 12 reworks. In Season 2, this is the least buffed character. It's quite a madness because anything that was considered a buff was mostly a rework. It was hard to gauge, would you rather have the older version of something or a new version of something? I think the only thing that you could say you'd want a new version of is the Icicle, whereas you don't want the older version of that. It's quite a madness, right? Like 9 buffs and 40 nerfs. A mad number you wouldn't expect. Season 3 launches in and we look at Johnny, and this is quite a mad one for sure. 26 buffs, 15 nerfs, and 2 reworks. The numbers will get lower and lower as we continue here, but these numbers are actually kinda low for Season 3, believe it or not. Very interesting seeing this number. Again, it's pretty average, but it's pretty low average, very low ratio. Because when you look at Elfelt, you have 27 buffs, 21 nerfs that were very impactful, and 8 reworks. This character has been reworked quite the bit since Season 3, having to rework the Bomb Jacket, Bomb Chocola, and of course her projectile. A lot of stuff has been changed about this character since her launch. Then you get to Abba. She has had 0 reworks, which is interesting, right? Because you'd be like, oh no, they definitely reworked Jealousy Gauge. And then you end up realizing that it was all just nerfs. There isn't a single rework in that, by the way. It's just nerfs. Has been buffed 13 times, and in terms of nerfs, she's one of the highest out the DLC. 51 nerfs for a Season 3 character that came later into it. This is a very high number. This number is absurdly high. Like, I guess she kind of like ruined the vibes of late Season 4 and Season 3, but this is a madness. Why are we nerfing this character to such a high degree where she's one of the worst characters in the game right now? That's an insane number. And people will still tell you, just manage the resources. Look at that number. That's not a good number. And then the final character for Season 3, Slayer, nothing mad. 27 buffs, 28 nerfs, and 1 rework. The rework was mostly on Master's Hammer, because when you look at the backdash, you could consider it a rework, but it's just a nerf. It's just straight up a nerf. Queen Dizzy, now we're in Season 4, so the numbers are going to get a lot lower. 14 buffs, 7 nerfs, and 5 reworks. This is a very high number for a character released during Season 4 a year ago. Nothing crazy, but very low numbers. I think Dizzy was the least nerfed out the roster, but we'll see. Venom received a total of 30 buffs. This shows how underwhelming this character was on launch alongside Dizzy, my goodness. 6 nerfs, 1 rework. A high number in the buffs for Season 4. I think this is like the highest you'll see. So Unica is a very interesting character. This is the lowest buffed character at 2. She has had a total of 2 buffs. Not even a bit. 11 nerfs, and the main thing that you would consider a buff are actually not buffs, are the reworks. 3 reworks indeed. This is why she's kinda crazy. This patch was mostly the reworks. The buffs, kinda, but it's the reworks, which is mad, because I think she's only had 2 patches the entire of her lifetime. Headed and Lucy, the number just jumps. It's quite mad. 12 buffs, 10 more than Unica, 16 nerfs, and 2 reworks. This is very funny to see, if I'm honest. This is hilarious to see. Like, what do you mean Unica got such a low number? Then you look at Lucy and it's just a jump. And that is it, because if we continue on, it's kinda cheating because they've still to be included in a patch, but if you want to, let's have a bit of fun. The least nerfed and buffed character and rework characters go down to Jam and Robokai. That's if you're stupid, but sure, let's go with that. So we're at the end, it's time to give our awards to the characters. This is going to be a very fun one. I'm going to try my best with the green screen, but if I get lazy, it'll be the render. Buffed, it goes to Zato and Foss, sharing it at 96. You could argue that the item toss were buffed more and the Eddie was buffed more, but you know what? They're here. And the most nerfed character goes to Ramlethal Valentine. That is a very high number at 85. Fun fact, no character reached the 80 digit. Very high. And the most reworked, I'll come back, don't leave just yet. Ramlethal with 29 reworks. Quite a madness indeed. And the most nerfed in one patch goes to Abba. A high amount of nerfs for sure during that last patch. And I think Chip was close with his Season 2 nerfs. He got a ton in one patch. And the most buffed in one patch definitely goes to Foss, with a lot of his items that were affected during, I think, Season 2 or Season 3. I'm not too sure which one, even though I just researched it. But he's therefore one of the most buffed. And the most balanced reward goes to May with a straight 50-50 on the buffs and nerfs. Very well done. And the most reworks in one patch goes to Potemkin, getting a total of 19 reworks during the Kara changes. Isn't that quite mad, big man? The least buff character goes to Unica at 2 buffs, which is a madness. The least nerf goes to Venom. It could have been Queen Dizzy, she was 1 off, but it goes to Venom at 6. The character that has been reworked the least is Abba at 0, because a lot of her changes were not reworks. They were nerfs. They were straight up nerfs. I feel sorry for you, hen. But that is it for today's video. It was a very fun one, counting it all, figuring out who was the most buffed, nerfed, reworked, and all that silly nonsense, and who got buffed and nerfed in the single patch the most. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions, be sure to ask them in the comments, and tell me what were your guesses. I cannot wait to see them when I'm reading this video. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, hype, sub, and tell me everything. You know, I want to hear all. I want to hear all, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.